Okay, so this is our inaugural group chat around issues that we feel are interesting and compelling here at Publivate. For this particular initial dialogue, we want to get our team's opinions on issues and topics that we think would find value to be discussed as part of public engagement and discourse in 2025. So there are no shortage of topics lying around us, and we're just going to have a bit of an organized free-for-all in terms of what the teams think. Would anyone like to kick it off?
I can, I guess, if no one else is feeling brave. I see a need for, and I think an appetite for a discussion around data privacy. And I know it's not a new topic, but I think with the new technologies that are coming out, AI moving at a rapid rate, things like facial recognition technology, license plate recognition technology, that's just jumping leaps and bounds above where it was even a couple of years ago. We haven't had a conversation around what public policy or legislation would look like to protect citizens' data. What happens when a police officer wants to check your Facebook profile and then use that facial recognition technology against other databases. And I think we do a lot of work on policing as a team, and I do think that it's a conversation I keep expecting to come up and hasn't yet really, around how police deal with these new technologies and what the policies would look like that would, both benefit policing and their changing environments and keep citizen data as safe and secure as possible. And I think maybe more, I don't know if you have an opinion on where that would feed into OCAP a little bit, from a perspective of, how Indigenous communities are seeing data privacy and data security. But I know it is something that we do talk about on occasion, not on occasion, often, is those OCAP principles and how they apply to Indigenous data. And so in a Canadian context, for sure, those technologies are going to need a lot of dialogue to get it right.
What is OCAP?
Ownership, control, access, and possession. It's an acronym that's used to denote the ways in which Indigenous communities have demanded that their data be kept safe, but more than that, that they have control and direct ownership over any data that is created from, with, or around their communities.
It is specific to First Nations, but as an organization, we do aim to apply that to all Indigenous distinctions that we work with in terms of being transparent and honest and building a relationship of respect and trust.
Right. And based on a long history of Indigenous peoples, certainly First Nations, but all three distinctions being taken advantage of, manipulated in terms of how their data has been treated, how they've been involved in everything from health studies to educational aspects, and ultimately OCAP has come about, and it's something that for Publivate, as more suggested, we apply, and frankly, there's great, I think, advantages for participants, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, in terms of, basic things we do, like sharing a transcript from a dialogue back with the participants. Just ask them, is this what you wanted to say? Your remarks in here can become part of the public record, so you've got an opportunity to, to adjust them, to correct them, and make sure they've got every opportunity to kind of own their contributions.
I think also OCAP is going to be an ongoing discussion, because there are other jurisdictions, Australia and New Zealand, who are developing different approaches to Indigenous data sovereignty that are maybe more extensive, not maybe, they are more extensive, more comprehensive. And I think that's coming to Canada, a discussion around whether OCAP is enough. And I think by and large, as an organization, we've heard, no, it's not. It's a good start, but there's a lot more to be done in that sphere. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's also a discussion that's coming sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well, I think it blends right into privacy.
Mhm.
AI and everything that is, going on there. I think one of my comments generally on artificial intelligence, and I think there's numerous topics that need to get onto the table in a very fulsome way in terms of artificial intelligence. I think one of the biggest challenges, whether it's privacy or governance and regulation, the future of work, is that it is exploding and moving forth in such a dynamic way that public jurisdictions can't keep up. Like it is literally changing so much. How do you get it to slow down long enough to put your arms around it? And that's almost a topic, I think, on artificial intelligence.
Yeah, one of the things that just came to my mind, Dana, when you were framing that, and Jordy, you've touched on it a bit as well, is just throughout 2024 and 2023 as well, and previously to that, we've had a lot of discussions, a lot of dialogues, and I find it interesting that it sounds like it really hasn't come up much in the discussions that we've been having, and I'm wondering why that might be the case. Is just something that people aren't thinking of? Is it, Jordy, to your point, how quickly and rapidly things are moving, or is it just a lack of understanding on the implications of what this is? Do we have any sort of sense from the talks we've had?
No, I haven't seen any studies, but I would say, I think in general you're leading into another AI topic, which is just literacy and public awareness. Do you like, again, it's moving so quickly and rapidly, and we've integrated it into our business, but I certainly have, maybe you do too, lots of friends that don't have basic understanding of how quickly different applications are kind of moving forward and already impacting aspects of personal and professional lives.
I think one of the things that I'm hearing my friends and colleagues talk about, which means I think we do need public discourse around it, it is coming, is how AI is going to change employment. And you just said it, Jordy. I mean, we've integrated into what we do, but I have friends who work in industries that they're looking, down the barrel of, is AI just going to replace my job in the next few years? And if so, what am I going to do? And that has implications for universal basic income, for retraining strategies, for creating new jobs somewhere for people. And I think those dialogues are coming fast because we need an answer. Because AI is going to take the jobs faster than we're going to be able to create new industries. So,
right. And what are the rules of the road and governance of incorporating AI into particular job streams where maybe there's a feeling that we might want to, as a country, as an industry area, take our foot off the accelerator, because yeah.
Is the public comfortable with an AI surgeon, for example, or is the public comfortable with an AI that drives taxi cabs? I was in Phoenix, Arizona not that long ago and got into a driverless car and thought, do I like this? Is this the future? And if so, am I comfortable? And what are the policies? If we got into an accident right now, what's the policy around that? I don't know if we have an answer to those questions.
Yeah, I mean, regulation is not able to move as quickly as the technology. So you're seeing a whole bunch of things like that, like your example with driverless cars, or even, what Tesla's doing, and autopilot and all of that, or FSD, full self-drive. And all of that is this gray zone, and it's, with regulation in the mix as well, it's really tough to keep up and know what to do that's ethical.
I would argue, because from a Canadian standpoint, as it relates to kind of AI and transportation in general, much more advanced than the US. And that is one area where they actually do have, and maybe they still don't have the right amount, but they've got more governance and focus on that area you know, there's been a few lives lost along the way in terms of various significant testing on full driverless vehicles that's gone about. The taxis are, you know, I think that horse has left the barn. You've got Phoenix, you've got San Francisco, you've got a growing number of communities where they're out, and they've been out for a few years now. But I personally think, in terms of public dialogue, there's some perhaps even more far-reaching topics that at some point you got to put a stake in the ground and start to have some significant conversations on these things, or you know, it's almost going to be too late as things get embedded into the way we live and the way we work, and pulling back on them might be difficult.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, you know, going into 2025, that being something that we're seeing more and more of in the discussions and the dialogues that we have surrounding all of that. Really, it's sort of inevitable. I think that'll happen.
What's interesting to me is we do have a privacy commission. So I'm bringing this back a little bit to privacy. We do have a privacy commission focused on supporting individuals. Where the link is missing for both AI and for privacy, in my estimation, is that there seems to be two different conversations. There is the one that takes place among industry and policymakers and academia. And then there's the rest of us who most of us don't fit into those groups. And we're just living our life, and life is coming at us fast. And what's missing, I think, is a more focused engagement with Canadians about what this means. What are the opportunities that are out there, but what are the risks? Not only the driverless car that runs into another driverless car, and what's the policy implications, but what are the policy implications of facial recognition? Positive part is you can get through an airport much faster, and that convenience is going to be very appealing to a lot of folks. There's going to be some people who are going to yell and scream that their privacy is being violated. What most Canadians, I don't think, have been engaged on is what are the pros and cons more explicitly, and what are the scenarios that this could lead to, and are we prepared for that? And if so, what are the guardrails that we put up around that? So I think there's a real opportunity for more focused engagement. Lacking a leader in this, one would presume it would be government, but there's the not-for-profit sector, academia is still such a big player that if there was some coordination, governance, and focus around these dialogues, it could, I would presume, be beneficial for Canadians down the road.
I'd throw in maybe one last AI topic, not that we couldn't do, an entire segment just on this, and that is investment. Again, the pace is moving so quickly. I think that at a provincial, federal level, some sort of dialogue that hones in on where Canada wants to consider investing in this ever-growing area. I almost see it to a degree, maybe like the car industry or something, where we can't do it all. We're a smaller country, a middle power, but what are the areas that as a nation we want to sort of focus on and give some investment into it, but also give some direction to provinces, educational institutions, et cetera, that, these 3 or 4 areas are where we want to kind of play, that we think are, almost some of the transitional elements as other, jobs go away. We know that new jobs are going to be created over here, and that's where we want to kind of lay our chips.
Have we seen any indication of specialization or where that's going, or as it stands right now, are we too early, or it looks like Canada's trying to boil the ocean on this almost?
Yeah, not that I'm
Yeah.
aware. We've got a number of leaders in the area. Jeffrey, oh, I'm forgetting his last name. A Canadian just won Nobel Prize for his work in AI, University of Toronto. I'm forgetting Jeffrey's Hinton, his last name. But he's very well known, and we've got a number of private sector organizations that have been in the vanguard. But I think it's quickly becoming one of these things where let's try and get a little bit smarter and see where we want to kind of invest in the area as it matures a little bit.
Find it
Yeah.
interesting in the topic of investments. I was listening to a podcast with Ned Howell, and he's a very well-known psychiatrist in the States, and was discussing ADHD and our neurodivergent individuals, and being as accessible and inclusive as possible. And he brought up the topic of AI, and he said one of the things that AI will not be able to replace is the uniqueness, the intelligence, and the new ideas that our neurodivergent individuals bring, and how important it actually is to invest in people, because those, like AI, can do wonderful things that we tell it to do, but we're telling it to do it because humans are intelligent and they are those wonderful things. So he almost put it the other way and said, invest in your people, invest in humans, invest in DEI, start including those people. And, if you're a smart business person, that investment would come out in the round, because you're going to end up with the great ideas that will be the next thing that's reaching to the top, and AI will continue to just be a generating computer.
No. Can I throw out another topic? This one kind of, when I was thinking about this last night, literally comes right home for me, and it's been out there for a while, and I have not seen any real public dialogues around it, and that's housing affordability. And I think, particularly for younger Canadians, I've got a 17 and a 19-year-old. I have no idea. I know how hard it was for me many years ago to, scrape together the money to be able to make a down payment on a house. And in, today's world, I think it is becoming more and more difficult. And while there have been some solutions that have been brought forward to allow for, enhanced savings and so on, I think it's a more looming crisis, if it's not a crisis already. And I think that, it ties into things like urban planning, perhaps, and not just finding, mechanisms to allow younger Canadians to support them in saving for purchasing a house, but also how we plan around that to try and make changes in other areas that relate to housing.
It's a great topic for youth engagement, I think, Jordy. I think I know very little about buying a home in Canada. It's something I should know more about, and I know there's all sorts of, initiatives and help, but I would need, public discourse to even start with the educational piece and understanding what is available and what I should be thinking about. And then from there, hopefully have an educated opinion on what would support somebody like me better to buy I don't own a home in Canada. So, I would be starting right from scratch, and I can imagine bringing people younger than me for sure together and saying, hey, do you even know, what is there to support you? And now that you do know, is it enough? And how could we enhance that? So there's so much there.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I see often is just from a housing perspective in owning and renting over the past several years, especially with COVID and post-COVID as well. Being in the National Capital Region, one of the interesting things is seeing people that otherwise we try to rent in Ottawa, which is more expensive than on the Quebec side in Gatineau and Hull, is sort of almost a mass exodus of Ontarians going over to the Quebec side just so they can afford a place to live. You know, it's not really a choice; it's out of necessity. So that's been quite interesting to see. And I deal with people day in, day out, just looking to rent a place, and the landscape has changed dramatically. It's so evident. It's not just a minor shift. It's major. That being said, you know, interest rates are on the way down as it stands right now. Rent is, this is anecdotal perhaps, but slightly on the way down, you know, tiny correction, but that's not going to solve what is a major issue. Jordy, as you mentioned, there's financial programs or incentives for first-time home buyers that exist. There's other financial incentives, but that's not solving what is a major issue, you know, with saving support and things like that. Even it's coming down to infrastructure. I know, at least within Ontario, we're allowing people to add, I believe it's secondary dwellings, or changing your primary residence to support more people. That's great, but the infrastructure, plumbing and all of that, and sewers, it doesn't support that. So I think it needs to be a giant discussion on how do we plan cities? What's that look like? What's the infrastructure in the city look like to support that? All so that we can have more housing and more affordable housing, whether that's purchase or rental as well. It falls on both sides of the coin.
I'm going to be a little bit provocative on this. I think that the dialogue that you're talking about being bigger than just affordability programs and near-term policies, Adam, I think you're bang on. I would take it even a step further that I don't know that we're ready as a society to have the kinds of conversations that may be necessary, or that we can solve this issue. And I'll give you 2 points that I want to raise specifically. One is, if you do go to Europe, home ownership is not what it is here in North America, and certainly in Canada. They've adapted, they've adjusted. The dream of having your own home was a given for us in Canada for 150 years. Is that dream ending? I would make another argument that to further be provocative on this. One of the challenges that we have is productivity in Canada. So I look at the housing crisis and I think, okay, I actually bought a $400,000 house one time 15 years ago, and I was making $120,000 a year, and my wife was making $120,000 a year. Well, it wasn't a concern at that point taking on that debt, because we knew Canadian productivity being what it was back some years ago, that salaries would rise, real income would rise. And that's been a problem over the last 15, 20 years. It hasn't. It's been productivity in Canada vis-a-vis, our competitors. I think about the US has historically been lower, but it's actually, we're losing ground. And so there's a broader policy issue that needs to be addressed, or at least considered, and to have some engagement around, other than just the near-term pressure that we have with young people trying to find housing or, homes.
Yeah. That's a super interesting point. It's not just how much the place costs, but there's a whole bunch of other factors. There's a big discussion. Yeah.
Guys, can we pause for a couple minutes while Maura's got to go help
Sure.
break out, and then we'll come back. We can stay right here. I don't think it'll go long, but Maura, go do what you need to do.
For newcomers, certainly making it a different ballgame for rentals. Not good nor bad, just that's the lay of the land, it seems, right now.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
I think it's also, and there's a few issues, maybe more than we realize, that are like this, where you know, often we are in the business of conducting national dialogues that, you know, go from one coast to another and all the way up, you know, north to the US border. You know, the role of provinces in this is, you know, so deeply integrated into solving things, and you know, the ability for you know, kind of for the nation to kind of all move in one direction on this. And it's always very difficult because you've got different leaderships with different, you know, objectives and ideas. But it really would be good, I think, if somehow you know, all of the jurisdictions at all levels could you know, throw themselves into this topic in probably an ongoing way, but it certainly could be led with, I think, some public engagement at the outset. People have other topics they want to bring forward?
I'd love to put one on the table, and that's the issue of, well, I think it's more a pertinent issue for people in Ottawa right now, but it does have broader implications for Canadians. And that's the size of the public service, how it's grown over the last number of years. It's an issue that's starting to resonate with people here. But it's one that's not well understood, I think, outside of Ottawa, but one I think an incoming government will want to tackle. And it would be great if they did it in what I would consider an informed way. So let me just lay out the problem for you very quickly. We've had since 2015, we've had an increase in the population, as we've talked about, under the housing issue. But the public service rate grew at about 40%. So since 2015, the spending has gone from around 280 billion to around 580 billion. So yes, some of this does account for an increase in the population, but that's more than double what the increase in the population is. And I would argue that particularly with the federal government, these are just federal government numbers, not provincial, municipal. I would argue that what the federal government does vis-a-vis provinces is they write checks. The actual frontline delivery is being done at other levels of government. So why has the bureaucracy grown so much? And is that a problem? Part of the problem is we can't explain whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But why has it happened? Well, one is just there's a bureaucratic proclivity towards increasing its size. That's private and public sector. There's no real price signals, though, in the public sector around the size of your bureaucracy. Some of it is in the federal government, at least, but just an inability to manage resources effectively. I'll give you an example. Everything is cost plus. You have a new program. Well, you don't re-engineer your staff and your processes and your programs towards a new spending area or a new priority. You just add on top, and there's never really any evaluation. No real sincere, serious evaluation of programs. And I would make one final point is that there is a growth, a risk aversion within the public service that has driven towards more and more control over public servants. And I think that's a problem in the sense that we have become so risk adverse. We're not actually risk adverse, we want to avoid blame. As opposed to cut down on risks, and we're fearful of blame. And so what this means is we'll spend $10 million in a department so that nobody gets caught with a $16 glass of orange juice. So I think this has long-term implications on Canadians, and I think it's a bigger issue than just us here in Ottawa. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. First of all, the cost of operating a public service like this at a time when we are entering probably a trade war with the US. There's lots of talk, and I don't want to be dramatic, but are we going to have a hot war in the next 10 or 15 years? We don't know, but the time for resilience is now, I would argue. And we are unable to do that when we spend a lot of our money paying off debts and for an overall burden on the public sector or on Canadian taxpayers because of the public sector. I would say that there's a second point I want to make is that there's a downstream impact on the morale and efficiency of the public service, where people, and I know this anecdotally, where folks have just become very frustrated with the number of rules and they want to leave the public sector because they came in with an idea of making a difference and they can't because of the overlapping rules and lack of trust, lack of efficiency. And then I want to say that the third point and final point for me that I want to raise for us is that there is a long-term effect of having this oversized, inefficient bureaucracy that leads itself to bigger problems we have in Canadian governance, and I would say Western governance, is there is a lack of trust in institutions. And one of the reasons we have a lack of trust in institutions is because people don't see, they see the inputs, but they're not seeing the outcomes, or many times the outputs. Nothing seems to change. And if you have an inefficient public service, then the long-term implications is even lower trust among Canadians for our institutions at a time when these are being questioned. Political parties are being questioned, banks are being questioned, media is being questioned. So these are areas that I think could use a public engagement, a discussion about what we want the future to be for our public service and what types of outcomes we'd love to see from public service, and what are the costs and trade-offs. Those are conversations that aren't taking place, but I think will start to roll out with the election of a new government likely next year.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent topic, and kind of a looming iceberg out there. I am not an economics expert, but I just don't think you can keep borrowing for forever, whether you're an individual or a country, and not have it have an effect, negatively on you at some point. The other, I think, pusher to try and have some sort of engagement around this is that typically, in my experience with government at any level, particularly at provincial, federal, maybe less at a local level, when it does get to the point where that jurisdiction is going to make cuts, it's done with a blunt-edged weapon that basically says, okay, everyone cut 4%. As opposed to having a little bit of thought and strategy integrated into the decision making as to how that could be done. And do we really want to just do the easy thing, or do we want to actually have a dialogue and make more strategic decisions? Because in my experience, it's always been the former, where, deputy ministers just get told, okay, Environment Canada, you're 4%, over there at ESDC, you're 4%. I'm, as opposed to something that is a little smarter.
Can I put a related topic on the table, which is, I think there may be a renewed interest, or maybe it's just my hope that there might be a renewed interest in a discussion around electoral reform, generally speaking. I think we sort of heard it just before Trudeau's first majority government was elected, right? It was tabled, it was discussed, and then it was a majority government that was elected, right? So there was no hunger on the government's part to follow through on that conversation. But we are seeing now the sort of divide, the political divide that is coming not just in Canada, sort of all Western nations are facing it. And this system that we have that sort of hands power to one party that doesn't necessarily represent the feelings of the nation as a whole, I think is starting to show its cracks in a way that perhaps it wasn't even 10 years ago. And I think there might be an interest on the public's part to have that conversation around, is this still a system, this first past the post system, is this still a system that serves us well? And if not, particularly in light of the American election and how many people are going to be misrepresented, I think, by their government in the next at least 2 years, and we'll see what happens at the midterm elections. It may be time for Canadians to think differently about how they're governed, which would, I think, lead directly into a discussion of, okay, how does the public service look when we change the whole structure of how we run the country, generally speaking?
And I believe that in the past, we've actually led governments and political parties provide that the leadership on these dialogues, and it's not happening. So there are opportunities for organizations like ours to help fill some of that gap.
And it's, I think it was the last election where there was all kinds of discussion around electoral reform and what was going to be done. And I think commitments made for having some public engagement on the topic, and
Didn't see it. Yeah.
And it's been lingering out there, well before the last election. Like, it just seems to forever be treading water, as opposed to being, at least discussed. And if you come back to keeping the same system, that's fine. But at least you've had a dialogue that has been full, and you've had interested communities and those with some innovation and insights able to kind of put some different approaches onto the table. So I don't know why it hasn't happened, to be honest.
All of these conversations that we've had so far today lend themselves to this sort of systems change dialogue that we would, I think, do well to engage with and be in a position to work with some folks on system change thinking, as opposed to particularly public policy initiatives. Something broader, I think, is warranted.
And systems in power don't want to talk about systems change, right? That's the problem, is that if you're the ones in charge, you don't really want to learn how you could be not in charge anymore. But that shouldn't stop us from having the conversation. It shouldn't stop us from voicing an opinion and maybe making some real change from the inside out.
Yeah, as Canadians, it's important.
Any other topics people want to bring forward? I've got another one, but I've already, I don't want to hog the mic here if others have topics.
Good on my end here.
One that, and it's really two topics coming together. One is very evident, and I think has been out there, which is that the country is aging, and how that is going to affect healthcare and what's being done, given the resources that are required for, old people like me that generally use a lot more of our society's, health benefits and resources later on in life. And, the other part of this is the number of people in the business is on a reasonably profound downward trend. And that's the part I think maybe the public is not as aware of.
What's that last part? Sorry, Jordy.
That the other part of the topic is the shrinking number of healthcare resources.
Oh.
You already have, probably best known among that is family physicians, and difficulty that's been going on for over a decade now, in some cases, depending upon where you live, and particularly if you're rural, to find a family physician. But it's now, bleeding into many other areas of the healthcare system, putting, more pressure on the ability for any province, any local area to be able to kind of serve citizens in terms of, even some of the basics. And it's only going to get worse. And you know, I have not seen, I've seen, you know, lots of articles and general discussion about, you know, the aging Canadian population. We're not the only country that faces that. And, you know, steps that are being taken as it ties into immigration, et cetera, to hopefully try and rejuvenate ourselves as a country somewhat. But, you know, the healthcare part of it and the increasing vacancies in key areas of it are you know, really going to lead to a problem. So you know, I think that again, it's one of these issues where, you know, the provinces have in some ways more control than the federal government. But if we could, you know, just all sort of put that aside and have some sort of a, you know, full dialogue around how we can be creative and innovative and you know, putting together some solutions that might be helpful regardless of the province that you're in or where you live. Again, you know, those up north are really kind of facing things, how technology, which is already very much helping the north, but how that can be you know, maybe advanced in ways that people are comfortable with. So I think there's lots of sort of issues and questions there that could be talked about.
It's almost, I mean, Jordy, it's almost succession planning, right? Which is something we've done with organizations before. Like, how do you plan for a handover of resources and that change management piece? And I didn't know this until about, I guess, a month ago. Someone told me there's less than 100,000 physicians in Canada total. And I looked that up because it sounded so wrong, and that turns out to be a true number. I think it's 97,000 physicians, and we're almost 40 million people. So, you know, if that number is dropping, then we have to have a serious conversation about that.
Yeah, and you know, why is it dropping? There's, you know, there are some, you know, documented reasons why that's the case and why you're seeing, you know, fewer family physicians, why they, you know, don't want to be in certain provinces, why they don't want to be in certain areas of certain provinces and territories. And you know, I think it's
Why they want to work in the United States.
yeah, well, and it's like, you know, complex public engagement is often you know what the problems are, and you know, the idea is to kind of set out the questions that you need to resolve in a way that is really going to try and get at some of the more profound dialogue and sharing and you know, both collaboration and in some cases back and forth to work through some of these things to get some answers. And you know, this is one where certainly we know the aging part and how that's going to affect things. I think, you know, the other parts of it are really kind of amplify some of the problems we're going to have if we don't try and get in front of this a little bit.
Yeah.
Can we pause for a quick second? I wouldn't want this being on the recording, but I believe that, you know, part of the challenge you've described or that we're talking about now is we have an inability as a society to say we need to prioritize some things over others. We have, as a society and reflected in our institutions and our government, we need to solve every problem for everybody. Every voice out there needs to be heard, and we have to prioritize those. We can't do big things anymore because we don't have the resources to do them and focus on solving a problem or two large problems. We try to solve 20 at the same time because we can't handle, our politicians and our parties can't handle criticisms about people who we've left behind. And I don't mean, we should leave people behind, but do we do public dental for every person, or do we try to solve the crisis around housing or the crisis around physicians? And most people would come back to me and say, it's not an either or, Nathan. And I would argue at some point it is. If you want to solve a problem, you can't only do half-ass 20 of them. You have to focus and make sacrifices to fix problems. Anyways, that's my rant. Sorry, off my soapbox now.
Yeah, I don't see that as a rant, and I don't know why you wouldn't want that part of this dialogue. I mean, we've just seen in the last week a rather rare, substantial, political upheaval that was based upon choices that, our political leaders wanted to make. And it was, such a profound disagreement that, arguably the most senior cabinet minister, was asked to leave, and then, got up and left in a very public way. And those, to me, that was around choices. So, I think that in a lot of these things, something like AI, if we sort of bring it back to kind of our first topic, a lot of the AI aspects are about making trade-offs. Do I want to make the trade-off in terms of what I'm giving up for my personal privacy to be able to, walk through security at an airport in a very efficient manner? Is that what I want to do or not? Right. And, you have to make those as a country, as a province, as a company, in a lot of cases. So I don't see that, what you said as a rant. I think it's a reality. And, I do think politicians historically have problems really sort of making those choices because, they want to stay in power and they want to get elected next time, and they don't want to piss anyone off that might fall towards, another candidate that might run against them, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I think it's a very real thing. And I think so much of it is about choices.
And it's also an interesting way to frame everything, right? We hear it now, I think more than we ever did before. Like, okay, I'm going to trade. It almost feels like I'm going to trade one freedom for one security, or I'm going to trade one this for one that. And when we do complex public engagement, that's the first thing we have to unwind, right? It's not, this is not a, one for one trade, and there's not an easy equivalency. There are so many pieces to this, and have we thought about all the depths and the layers of, oh, I'm going to trade in one freedom. Well, what does that freedom really represent, and what do you get out of giving up that right or what have you? I think that's really complicated, and for a soundbite purpose, it's really easy to say, okay, it's this simple, but it's never this simple,
Right.
and that's where we lose.
Yeah, if
nuance.
you don't have that authentic input from all of the right audience members, so that you can kind of fully understand the issue rather than perhaps, having a more limited conversation, that you don't have articulated views from those that are affected, in some cases in big numbers, by that particular issue. It's one of the reasons why we do what we do, is to be able to try and make sure that if that premier or prime minister or minister or whomever is going to make a decision, that they've got all of the evidence that they need to make the best possible decision, because it might come down to sort of big choices. I think, some of the stuff we did a few years ago on rare diseases, and it was all about that. You had a very straightforward challenge that was good in some ways, but bad in others, which was that the government had committed to increasing the spend to support medicines and other elements that were going to help those with rare diseases. And it was a fairly big number, you would think. I think it was a 1.5 billion over 5 years. Then you find out that there's hundreds and hundreds of rare diseases. And, the impact for a lot of these very costly ailments that people have is life and death as to whether or not they get a part, whether they get included in that decision. So, yeah, I think all the time we're faced with that. And I would hate to be the one making ill-informed decisions. I think that's the worst situation, particularly when you've got complex issues that have significant ramifications.
I loved that rare diseases dialogue because it gave us the opportunity to bring the conversation back to the very basic question: what is a rare disease? Like Health Canada wanted to dive into how do we spend this money, and we really got the chance to take it right to its root and come right back to what's the definition, what do you want to include, what's in scope, and without those definitions you can't get anywhere. And that was a really interesting and fun project, to really think about the base nuance of the question, which sounded simple at the beginning and was really complex to navigate.
Right.
Sorry, I know we're over time.
Yeah, I know. And I think that was born out of asking the federal government how many rare diseases there were in Canada. And I very much remember their answer was, we're not quite sure. We think it's 700, but
it depends on your definition of rare disease, depends on your definition of patient. I mean, we got every answer in the book, right? Because they can't define it either.
Right.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts from anyone?
I think 2025 is going to be turbulent and interesting, to say the least. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, I think, here today.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine a time when what we do is more important. I really can't. As we watch the world become more divisive, as we watch big decisions being made on technologies we do not understand the implications of and cannot predict the future of, and as we see it moving faster than it's ever moved before, I honestly cannot think of a time where we want to bring people together to talk about thoughts, feelings, opinions, fears, concerns, and policy more than right now.
Sure. I mean, with all the change in government, both in North America across the board, last week in Canada, last month or month and a half in the US, it's lots of things are changing. So it'd be interesting.